Welcome back to the last PowerPoint while I'm gone. This is the last half of chapter 23, and we're just going over the types of animal respiratory systems. We're going to see a lot of different ones. Your main objective for today is to classify and explain the physiology of the types of respiratory systems for different animals. And we're going to be looking at 12 different animals today. Cutaneous gas exchange is pretty interesting. You see it in salamanders as one example. You also see it in bullfrogs. And the idea here is that I guess technically humans have a little bit of this, but in reality, the more water loss that occurs across the skin in these animals, the more likely you're going to see exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, right? This here shows the exact extent of skin breathing in different species. And of course, it all depends upon environmental, like the temperature as well. We previously talked about teleost fish and how they move water across their gills, and then the oxygen diffuses in that way into their blood. But scientists have identified more than 400 species of air-breathing fish. And they have this organ that's derived from either the buccal cavity, opercular cavity, stomach, or intestine, or one that originates as an outpocketing in the foregut, which is also known as the swim bladder. The lungs in lungfish are synonymous with swim bladders in other fish, and they just have all of these vascularized folds, meaning there's a lot of blood vessels running all over those folds, and that air that's breathed in through their mouth through that area then exchanges with their blood, kind of like our lungs do. Bottom-dwelling fish don't have swim bladders because they don't have to float up to the top, because swim bladders help with buoyancy. But here you can see that there is a type of fish that breathes air. It's called the lungfish. Amphibians are the animals that most mix water and air breathing. So if we were in class, I would ask you, how do they do this? Think about it. How is it that they're able to combine both water breathing and air breathing? What from your reading shows you this? Okay, we're going to describe how this occurs in the bullfrog, but you should look at other amphibians as well. What you see here is that the frogs start out as tadpoles, and those tadpoles live mainly aquatically at first, but they develop the ability to breathe air, and then they turn into little froglets, and then they turn into adults. So what you see, let's look at the top graph. What you see in the tadpoles is that their oxygen, most of it comes either from the skin or from the gills, right? And then as they become more and more air breathing, the amount of oxygen coming through their gills declines, and their skin starts to go down as well, but not as quickly and not as much. And they're still able to take in about 20% oxygen through their skin, whereas their oxygen levels coming in through their lungs increases up until adulthood. So that's really cool here, is that they have gills that then, as they get mature, lungs take over, but you still see a lot of oxygen uptake through the skin. Now, carbon dioxide, it's about half and half skin and gills in the aquatic tadpoles and the air-breathing tadpoles. But again, as the gills go away, the lungs are going to take over a little bit, but not very much. Most of the carbon dioxide is still lost through the skin. Okay, breathing in birds is actually unidirectional. And you would think they breathe in through their mouth, they breathe out through their mouth, so they must have tidal flow. but it's going to be different. If you look here, I just want you to see the direction of the air waves, right? So they're basically, as they breathe in, the anterior air sacs expand and fill with gas that has passed across the respiratory exchange surfaces. And then as they exhale, the anterior sacs are compressed and then they discharge stale air and it goes out the basically the trachea and then out the mouth. So you can see it has this, it goes around the system, right? And so that's what makes it different than tidal flow. Tidal flow goes in and out, but it doesn't have a one direction. And maybe you can pause here and zoom in, but the idea here is as it flows in, it's going to move around and go in one direction. It doesn't go out the same way it came in. Okay, we have 4 more examples of gills in aquatic invertebrates. So these are organisms that are going to have gills, right? So the terabellid worm is a type of annelid that lives inside a tube, and it pumps water in and out of the tube, and the gills that are in there get bathed with the water and the gas exchange there. The fan worm is another type of annelid. It lives in a tube, but when it's not being disturbed, it'll put these tentacles out into the ambient water. And those tentacles are used for both feeding and gas exchange. So that's pretty cool. Sea stars have these very thin-walled, finger-like projections on their upper body as well as underneath in their it's called the coelomic cavity, the cavity for feeding, basically. And gas exchange is going to flow between the coelomic fluid and the water by diffusion. So there are these little projection thingies that you can see. And the idea there, these little foot processes are going to allow this to flow. And then finally, these horseshoe crabs have these really cool, what they're called book gills. And the book gills have all these little, and they call them book gills because they look like pages of a book. And those book gills will do this little flapping motion, and then that allows for gas exchange through the water as they come through. So I'd pause for a minute, try and write these all down in your table. But these are 4 different examples of gills that enable gas exchange in aquatic invertebrates. Okay, on your table I just wrote mollusks, but what you have here are aquatic snails, clams, squid, and a land snail. And what you can see is all the water ones have these internal gills, right? You notice that their gills are inside some type of cavity. So those would be considered internal gills. I guess the land snail that's here also has what we call lungs. So you might have to make a separate note there. But all these water mollusks are going to have internal gills. The crayfish also have internal gills. So you can see here these outer exoskeleton is called the carapace. That is going to overhang this internal cavity we call the brachial chamber, and they have internal gills. Insects are really interesting because they have this tracheal system that basically, because they lack a respiratory pigment like hemoglobin, they don't have that. So they can't really transport oxygen through their blood-like fluid, which they don't really have they have a fluid, but it's not really blood either, right? They can't really transport it that way. So they basically have to bring air in touch with all the cells of their body. And they do that through this tracheal system, right? And so it's this tubes where air flows throughout the whole body. So what you see here is a flea a honeybee, and an ant, all with these tracheal systems. Some spiders also have the tracheal system, but others have these book lungs that basically have their external lungs with lamellae. They kind of seem like gills where air flows across those. So you're going to see book lungs in some spiders and a lot of scorpions.